Amy Coney Barrett's time before the Senate Judiciary Committee is up, and her confirmation to the Supreme Court is slated for Friday. We break down how a Justice Barrett would fit on the bench.
And President Trump and challenger Joe Biden took part in separate town halls last week in lieu of a virtual debate. We'll have the highlights from Thursday night's dueling town halls.
And the latest data is suggesting Joe Biden leads President Trump among likely voters in several key swing states. We'll tell you how current polling is different from polling from 4 years ago, tonight on Talking Points.
We're just 15 days to Election Day, and Joe Biden still holds a lead over President Trump in most battleground states. Good evening. I'm Michael Furnari.
And I'm Manny Martinez. Tonight, the president is set to speak in Arizona, one of those key states this year, while Joe Biden is back in his Delaware home, not holding any more campaign events before Thursday's presidential debate. But
we begin tonight with Supreme Court nominee Amy Coney Barret. The Senate Judiciary Committee convened for her confirmation hearings for the Supreme Court last week. Republicans praised her judicial disposition and background, while Democrats criticized her previous opinions on rulings concerning Obamacare and abortion. So now we bring in Talking Points analyst Oscar Offerman to discuss Judge Barrett's views and how she would fit into this court. So, Oscar, Senate Democrats have questioned Judge Barrett. They talked to her mostly about her controversial views, potentially controversial views on abortion, Roe v. Wade, and Obamacare. What did she say about those stances?
So Judge Barrett used what's known as the Ginsburg rule, which means that no speculation, no hints about what she would rule on a case that she would potentially rule on in the Supreme Court. Now, Democratic Delaware Senator Chris Coons also questioned her about her stance on Griswold versus Connecticut. Now, that case decided that couples are entitled to the right to privacy and the right to use contraceptives. Now, that's important because that was, many say, is the basis for the Supreme Court's ruling in 1973 on Roe v. Wade. Now, that brings up the debate on super precedent. Now, what is super precedent, you might ask? Super precedent is the idea that there are cases that are so uncontroversial, so common sense, that there is no way that they can be overturned in a court of law. Now, a case that comes to mind with that is Brown v. Board of Education. Now, here's what Judge Barrett had to say about super precedent as it relates to Roe versus Wade.
Okay, well, people use super precedent differently.
Okay.
The way that it's used in the scholarship and the way that I was using it in the article that you're reading from was to define cases that are so well settled that no political actors and no people seriously push for their overruling. And I'm answering a lot of questions about Roe, which I think indicates that Roe doesn't fall in that category.
Now, she also utilized the Ginsburg rule as it relates to Obamacare. The only part of Obamacare that she was able to contribute on was the provision allowing children to stay on their parents' health care plans until they're 26. Other than that, she really didn't have anything to say on either abortion or Obamacare.
So, Oscar, during these hearings, we hear a lot of terms being floated around about judicial philosophy. Among them are originalism and textualism. That's used to define a lot of conservative justices. What can you tell me about those two terms, and which of those describes Judge Barrett?
So both of these terms have to relate to the Constitution. Now, originalism has to do with intent of the Founding Fathers, while textualism more has to deal with the actual text of the Constitution. Now, these two terms are conflated and misconstrued with each other all the time. Judge Barrett does fit in to that textualism camp. Now, why is that important? It's important because Democrats feel that judges who rule cases with originalist and textualist views will turn down cases involving abortion or Obamacare.
So, Oscar, quickly here, can you give me some of the moments that stood out? Obviously, you watched a lot of these hearings. What's something that we should take away from these hearings this week?
So what was really interesting is how Democrats pressed Judge Barrett on her religious views. Now, it is worth mentioning, if confirmed, Judge Barrett would be the 6th Catholic senator on the court, and it is significant for Democrats because they think that religious conservatives like Judge Barrett would overturn cases involving Roe versus Wade or gay marriage.
Thank you, Oscar. There was supposed to be a debate last Thursday, but that didn't happen after President Trump refused to debate in a virtual format. He and former VP Joe Biden held separate televised town halls. Talking Points analyst Brandon Ross joins us to break down what we learned in the dueling town halls. So, Brandon, what issues did the events focus on? What was the main point?
Well, the main idea of it was for Biden to stick to the script and Trump to take the offensive. One of them succeeded, one of them didn't. Biden did exactly what he went in intending to do. He stuck to the script, COVID policy, overturning the tax cuts, trying to make fundamental changes to changes Trump made in his tenure. Meanwhile, the president had to play defense on questions from Savannah Guthrie all night while he was on air for NBC. And he was often put in a position to try to explain his actions and explain his sayings in the past without actually putting forward any new policy to further the discussion.
So you mentioned the president being on his heels for the majority of the night. Where did the president struggle most?
I don't think there's any doubt about that, and that's the QAnon question. Savannah Guthrie asked him his beliefs on QAnon, and it's been a typical answer. He gave the same one on David Duke, gave the same one on Proud Boys when asked about it after the first debate. He said didn't know much about it other than that they're very against pedophilia, which is often, it is part of the movement, but it is often part to drag in to the idea that many Democratic politicians are involved in some grand conspiracy, and he got a lot of flack for how he approached that answer.
Right, and one of the fascinating aspects of these town halls was the fact that they were on different networks, but at the same time. So, you know, the president, he cares a lot about ratings. Who won that battle?
You know, the president was upset. He had 3 networks on his side, NBC, CNBC, and MSNBC, but he still couldn't pull out the victory. Joe Biden had the edge as he had a 14.1 million draw on ABC alone. Meanwhile, the president could only pull off a measly 13.5.
And all of this is leading up to the debate this week on Thursday. What can we expect then?
Expect Trump to go back on the offensive. He did the same thing back in the first debate. Definitely did not play off too well with the commission, but expect him to try to work a little closer within the rules, but still try to go after Biden's record.
Brandon, thank you. We are just over 2 weeks from Election Day, and swing states are at the top of both candidates' agendas. Polls have Joe Biden winning in a majority of key states, but as we saw in 2016, they can be misleading. Here to break down the numbers is Talking Points analyst Natalie Fahmy.
That's right, Manny. Now let's get right to it, starting with key states that are leaning towards a Biden win. Pennsylvania is a key state where both Biden and Trump have been focusing a good amount of energy on, and it's leaning blue. Right now, Biden holds an average lead in the state by 7.2 points, which is worrisome for Trump because he only won by 0.7 in 2016. Statistically very close to Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, Biden holds an average lead of 7.2 points. Again, a state Trump only won by 0.8 points. And Wisconsin is a state that experts say will be a key determining factor in this year's election. Finally, in Michigan, Biden is leading by 8 points, a state Trump only won by 0.2. And in stark contrast, the states that seem to be leaning red show a small lead for Trump. In Iowa, Trump is polling ahead in average polls, but only by 1 point, and he won the state by 9.4 in 2016. And the president has been spending a large amount of time in Georgia, a state Democrats usually do not campaign in, and yet average polls show Biden ahead by 0.9 points. But Trump won the 2016 by just over 5 points. Now Georgia is still leaning red towards a red win because, as I said, Democrats do not spend too much time in the state, and the average lead that Biden has is quite low with a margin of error. Now for toss-up states where there are no certain leads for either candidate. In Ohio, which is a swing state that voted for Trump by 8 points in 2016, Biden holds an average lead of 0.7 points, but recently in day-to-day polls, Trump has been between 2 and 4 points ahead. North Carolina is another close race as Biden is up 2.9 points and Trump only won by 3.7 points 4 years ago. But again, if you look at day-to-day polls earlier this month and in September, Biden led the state, sometimes by just 1. And finally, a highly important state for both candidates is Florida, a state that Biden has an average lead of 4.5 points and that Trump only won by 1.2 against Hillary Clinton. But as last Friday, Biden only led the state by 1 point. And as far as strategies go, Biden is taking this week to focus on debate preparation, but he has surrogates on the trail for him. He sent former President Barack Obama to key states in order to encourage undecided voters to cast their ballot for Biden. Biden's team is focusing on building momentum and not letting the polls lead them to make the same mistake made in 2016. Now, Trump continues to ride off his quick COVID recovery and again is spending a large amount of time hosting rallies and encouraging his base. Trump is also being careful not to speak out about any particular group that might have his support, that might cause his supporters to lose votes and cast doubt on the election process.
Natalie, thank you very much. And coming up next on Talking Points, we'll discuss the key Senate races that could tip the balance of power on the Hill next year. Stay with us.
Leaving hot coals improperly extinguished can cause a wildfire.
Hey guys, it's Smokey!
It looks as if Smokey is going to use the drown, stir, drown and feel technique. After the first drown, a good stir. Next, another drink. And finally, a close feel.
Is it cool? Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Smokey, catch! Oh, my bad, Smokey.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Most party fouls are pretty dumb. But if you decide to drink and drive underage, you could lose your license and your freedom. Underage drinking and driving. The ultimate party foul.
They'll test you. Try to break your will. But however loud the loudness gets, however many cheese puffs may fly, you're the driver. The one in control. Stand firm. Just wait. And move only when you hear the click that says they're buckled in for the drive. Never give up till they buckle up.
North Carolina Democratic Senate candidate Cal Cunningham's multiple affairs are causing a shakeup in one of the nation's most critical Senate races in the final weeks. According to Real Clear Politics polling average, Cunningham's lead in North Carolina has dropped a few points in the last 2 weeks since the scandal emerged. Here to catch us up on the nation's close Senate races is Talking Points elections analyst Anthony Dabbundo. So, Anthony, what are the polls saying about Cunningham since the scandal?
Well, we've seen that Cunningham's lead has dipped a couple of points. Now, he still is in the lead. Real Clear Politics has him up about 4.3 points. 538's elections model has them up about 3 points. But his favorability has taken a bit of a hit, especially amongst women. Now, one interesting thing to note is that his favorability amongst younger voters and men has actually ticked up a few points. It may just be polling noise, but it is notable. But his favorability amongst women, who are part of the Democratic base, has ticked down, and it could cost him in the race. But in the end, it probably comes down to how North Carolina goes at the presidential level. These races tend to track pretty closely between both the president and the senatorial race. So if Biden is winning in North Carolina, that bodes really well for Cal Cunningham.
And Anthony, how are GOP senators polling compared to the president?
It's actually quite a difference from 2016. We saw in 2016 in Wisconsin, where Ron Johnson outran President Trump in Wisconsin. In Pennsylvania, Pat Toomey outran the president. In North Carolina, Richard Burr outran President Trump. We've seen that the Republicans have done well. Well, that's not exactly the case when we look in some of the other races that are going on across the board in Iowa and Montana, where GOP Senate candidates, including North Carolina, are falling behind and even lagging behind. It's not sure what the explanation for this could be, but maybe potentially some of the diehard Trump supporters are not happy with more of the establishment GOP voters and our GOP senators and are voting Democratic down the ballot.
So, Anthony, can you tell me more about some of the long shot pickup opportunities across this map for both parties?
Well, the Republican Party should pick up Alabama. It's a safe red seat. Generally, they should be able to unseat incumbent Senator Doug Jones. But when we look at a potential GOP race here in Michigan, we see incumbent Senator Gary Peters is in quite a close race with Republican John James. Now, James ran in 2018 and lost against Debbie Stabenow. It's a better environment for him, and he's hoping to pick up more of the suburban voters that may go for Joe Biden at that level, but will go for him down the ballot. Peters has a small lead, but it's not as big as Biden's lead in Michigan. And for the GOP, or for the Democrats, Governor Steve Bullock is running for Senate against incumbent Senator Steve Daines, the battle of the Steves. Daines has a small advantage, but this is Montana we're talking about here, where Bullock has a real chance to unseat a Republican senator in a pretty red state.
So, Anthony, I hate to put you on the spot here, but can you give me a prediction for where this Senate total is going to fall?
As you know, I am in the predictions business, and this is my map here. I've got Maine up here going blue. I think it's lean Democrat right now. Susan Collins is in a lot of trouble up there. Biden's going to carry the state by double digits. It could be ugly for them. But the big race is, of course, in North Carolina. North Carolina, Iowa, and Montana are the three races. Democrats need one of them plus the presidency to take the Senate, or just two of them to take the Senate. There are other reaches potentially down in Georgia where there are two Senate races, but I don't quite see them going. It's going to be close, but I think in the end, the GOP senators get across the line there. So in the end, maybe one or two seats, but Democrats are definitely favored to take the Senate, and it could be a Democratic trifecta come January.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Huge ramifications for whatever's going to happen in the next few years.
Right, and the Senate will vote on a $500 billion coronavirus stimulus bill Wednesday. Within the last few weeks, Senate Democrats and Republicans have struggled to agree on funding for the bill. Talking Points analyst Moriah Humiston joins us now to explain the discussions around the stimulus bill. Moriah?
Thanks, Manny. Last week, Nancy Pelosi proposed a $2.2 trillion bill, which was then knocked down to $1.8 trillion by President Trump. Now, Republicans are saying that that is still too much money, and they will be voting on a $500 billion stimulus bill. Now, Nancy Pelosi says that this is too thin, and her and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell are disagreeing on how much money the stimulus bill should include. Now, Democrats are also criticizing Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and other Republicans, saying that they are spending too much time on Supreme Court hearings and not enough time figuring out the stimulus relief bill. Pelosi now says that the bill must be voted on by tomorrow night in order to have a bill passed before the election.
So, Moriah, given that tight deadline, how likely is this aid to pass?
Democrats and Republicans on both sides are skeptical for this bill to pass tomorrow evening. Specifically, Representatives Tom Malinowski and Ro Khanna are saying to Nancy Pelosi to take the $1.8 trillion bill. However, Nancy Pelosi is hopeful, saying that she thinks Democrats and Republicans will come to an agreement tomorrow night for a stimulus bill to pass. However, if they do not come to an agreement, there will not be a stimulus relief bill passed before November 3rd.
Thanks, Moriah. Such an important issue to so many people here. Now, California is experiencing some of the worst wildfires in the state's history. And after a long back and forth between the Trump administration and California's government, the president has just approved federal disaster relief for wildlife recovery. Here to break down what has been happening in California is Talking Points analyst Spencer Kweskin. Spencer?
Thanks, guys. So, President Trump has just approved federal relief for California's wildfires. This aid, however, has not been easy to get for California. The Trump administration has been critical of California in the past.
And then on top of it, you got fires eating away at California every year because management is so bad. The governor doesn't know. He's like a child. He doesn't know what he's doing.
Both California and the Trump administration have been at odds for a while now. The Democratic stronghold's policies on homelessness, climate change, auto emissions, illegal immigrants, and more have added up to make California a target for Trump and other Republicans, and Trump a target for California. However, after months of requests in some of the worst wildfires in California history, President Trump has approved a federal disaster relief aid package. Trump at first rejected the aid package, with the president stating that agencies already exist within the state and the federal government would cover the cost. However, after a meeting with California Governor Gavin Newsom and Congressman Kevin McCarthy, the president has flipped and is now approving aid. While details about the aid package are currently unreleased, the aid is anticipated to cover the Valley Fire in San Diego, the El Dorado Fire in San Bernardino, the Slater Fire in Siskiyou, the Oak Fire in Mendocino, the Bobcat Fire in Los Angeles, and the Creek Fire in Fresno. President Trump has previously approved 68 aid packages for fire relief within the state, 61 of which were for firefighting, 5 for disaster relief, and 2 for emergency services. Spencer Kweskin, reporting from Los Angeles, back to you.
Thank you very much, Spencer. And coming up, after months of delays, there appears to be a new president in Bolivia. We'll catch you up after the break.
Stay with us.
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
Did you hear about the pony with a sore throat? He was a little horse. Can I tell you a cat joke? Just kidding. Why couldn't the Why was the basketball court all wet? Why? Because the players kept dribbling all over it. Where did cats go on vacation? New York.
They call me Maxie, but I prefer tripod. I was your above-average four-legged homie, and then wham, bam, minivan. Some people pity me. Now that's lame. I still run, fetch, and swim. And the ladies love me. I'm the ultimate wingman. Just don't ask me to high-five.
Now we highlight yet another contentious election in the Americas. This time, let's go south. Bolivia is facing social, political, and economic turmoil and held its presidential elections yesterday after the pandemic forced 2 delays.
And today, socialist candidate Luis Arce is declaring victory. His closest rival, the centrist Carlos Mesa, admitting defeat. The resounding victory for Arce is a win for Bolivia's exiled former president, Evo Morales, who handpicked Arce from his refuge in Argentina as his party's candidate. So, Manny, let's talk about what the process here is in Bolivia for this election. What can you tell me?
Right, so it's multiple rounds of voting, but it looks like it's going to be over after Sunday's election. One of the stipulations is the fact that the president would need at least 40% of the vote, and it's going to look like Arce has that. And on top of that, he has to lead the next candidate by at least 10% of the vote. And again, exit polling suggests that Arce is pretty well clear that margin. It's kind of a resounding victory for him.
So now to understand what's going on in this election, we have to get into a little bit of recent history. So this election was supposed to take place in the fall of 2019. So in fall of 2019, Morales was going to plan on running for another term. He's been running for president of Bolivia since 2002. So he was planning to skirt around those term limits, but the military stopped that from happening, and he was charged with sedition and other crimes, and he had to actually seek exile in Argentina in order to stay safe. A conservative government took power in the meantime, and so they had to make up a new election. The election did not actually take place in November 2019. Mm-hmm. So they ended up delaying the election further because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Critics of that conservative government say that that was an excuse and a pretense to kind of put off this election. So now what we're seeing really is that this is going to be a big, big victory for the left wing in this country, and it's really going to consolidate their power after so much controversy over this last year.
Absolutely, and you mentioned Evo Morales, and the winner of this election, Arce, worked in his administration for 11 years, so Morales is certainly no stranger, and we mentioned that he handpicked Arce as the candidate for the MAS party, the Socialist Party in Bolivia, and it is a victory that is a rebuke of the conservative politics and the U.S.-backed conservative politics that we were seeing in Bolivia for the past almost year now.
Absolutely right, Manny. So really what we're seeing now is that there's going to be kind of a new alliance, at least in these new countries, with Venezuela, Cuba, those left-wing socialist countries in South America. And coming up after the break, we're going to be bringing Brandon Ross back to talk to us about the next steps in Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation process. Stay with us.
I see you mobbing over her. Let's go. Let's mob. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, we mobbing. Come on, girl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl.
Looking ahead to the rest of October, tension in Washington is still going to be running high. Brandon Ross is back on to discuss what is on the docket coming forward here. So Brandon, what can you tell me about the next steps for Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation?
Well, basically, we're just waiting for it to become official now. In just about 3 days, the Senate Judiciary Committee is going to hold a vote. And then once that goes through, expect the official nomination vote, or rather confirmation vote, to occur next week. Democrats have really opposed this nomination from the beginning, but it seems like the saga is coming to an end.
And you just mentioned it, Democrats. They've been against this nomination from the very start of this whole process. Is there any way for the Democrats to stall or even stop the confirmation vote at this point?
Well, there have been discussions within the Democratic camps about potentially boycotting the committee vote. And the idea there would be, in case there would be an inability to gather a quorum, a vote on confirmation cannot even be held. Unfortunately, for them at least, Republicans have 12 of the 22 spots on the Judiciary Committee, and because of that, since they have 12, they can, by default, hold the quorum in that situation.
So Brandon, staying in Congress, I'd like to talk about the economy a little bit. We've got no stimulus deal as of now. Moriah mentioned earlier that it's probably not going to happen before Election Day. So what and who would be impacted by this? This is really a huge issue right now. What can you tell me?
Well, of course, there are the people who might see those monthly checks stop coming through. There are people who are relying on the PPE that will eventually run PPP, excuse me, not PPE, Payment Protection Plan for Small Business, that will eventually run out. And again, a lot of major corporations as well have had to do a lot of layoffs, particularly airlines in the last couple of weeks. So expect those to be really hard hit, and some of those layoffs may even become permanent, unfortunately.
So Brandon, one last question here. What can you tell us about, we're talking about the stimulus bill. It's a huge issue affecting a lot of Americans. Do you see this having any impact on what happens here in November?
No, not at all. I think based on what polling has suggested going into the debates, going into all of these topic issues, Americans are more fixed on who they're going to vote for than any other time in recent memory. I think that whatever happens with the stimulus bill is not going to make any difference.
It's one of those things that really shows a lot of Americans' frustration with what's going on in Congress, what's going on here. You mentioned that bill. To get into the specifics of the bill that was shot down last week, so we're talking about differences in about $1 billion between.
Just like in relation to a lot of things, very minimal difference.
Absolutely, and yet it still ends up being enough to kill some of these bills, and it's hard not to wonder how a lot of Americans are a little bit frustrated with what's going on here. It seems like whatever the status quo is, this stuff has really, Congress has failed Americans in a lot of ways, and that's why you see the states bringing so much of this power. It's why you see President Trump taking so much power with these executive orders. I mean, he's really taken it upon himself to get a lot of this stuff done in place of Congress.
It's ruling by pen in the Oval Office.
Absolutely. It's something we've seen for the last 20 years or so pretty consistently. And that's going to be all the time we have for Talking Points tonight. Be sure to follow us on social media. Follow us on Twitter at CitrusTV News and like us on Facebook. I'm Michael Furnari.
And I'm Manny Martinez. Thank you for watching. Have a great night, everyone.